When I opened that Bible and the note fell to the floor, I felt as if the whole world had stopped turning. If she discovers the truth, kill her. 7 words that transformed the devoted wife I was into the strong woman I became. Good morning, my dears. I'm Gertrude Miller. I'm 78 years old, and today I'm going to share with you a story I've kept in my heart for almost 50 years. But before I begin, if you're watching this, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This helps me continue sharing my stories with you all. It was 1969, and I was only 29 years old. America was going through difficult times with the Vietnam War and civil rights movement, but in our small town in Virginia, life continued at its quiet pace, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. I had been married for 10 years to Anthony, a man everyone respected. He was the accountant at the only bank in town, always wore impeccable suits, and was considered an example of honesty and dedication. Our house was on a tree-lined street, a simple but comfortable construction with a small garden in front where I grew my dahlias. We had 2 wonderful children, Michael, 8 years old, a smart boy who loved to read, and Teresa, 6 years old, a little artist who filled page after page with her colorful drawings. I was what they called the perfect wife back then. I woke up before everyone to prepare breakfast. The smell of homemade bread filled the house while I got the children ready for school. Anthony had his coffee while reading the newspaper that the delivery boy left at our door every morning. After everyone left, I cleaned the house, did laundry, and in my free time, I sewed for a select clientele in town. It was my mother who taught me to sew. She said a woman needs a craft in her hands to never be in need. Little did she know how this advice would change my destiny. Our life seemed perfect in the eyes of others. Anthony was affectionate when there were visitors, brought presents on special dates, and there was never a lack of food on the table. But behind closed doors, there were prolonged silences, unexplained absences, and that feeling that something important was always escaping me. He traveled frequently for work, especially on the first Thursday of each month. Bank business, he vaguely explained. I believed him, or perhaps I wanted to believe. After all, questioning wasn't welcome in our home. Once, when I asked for more details about one of these trips, he looked at me coldly and said, "You have a roof over your head and food on the table. You don't need to know more than that." On that Sunday, August 17, 1969, my life changed forever. I remember perfectly because it was my mother's birthday. May God rest her soul. The children were at my mother-in-law's house, Mrs. Amelia, for Sunday lunch. Anthony had left earlier, saying he needed to resolve some urgent paperwork at the bank before a big transfer that would happen the following week. I was alone at home, fighting against a terrible migraine that had started during the night. The pain was so intense, it created bright spots in my vision. I tried to lie down, but it was impossible. I knew Anthony kept strong painkillers in his office, medications he brought from New York that worked better than any herbal tea my mother had taught me to make. Anthony's office was forbidden territory for me and the children. A man needs a space where he can think without interruptions, he used to say. The door was always closed, but not locked when he was away. I guess he never imagined I would dare enter without his permission. That day, however, the pain spoke louder than respect for the unspoken rules of our marriage. I entered the office looking for the medicine. The room was somber, with a dark wooden desk, a leather armchair, and shelves full of books that I doubted he actually read. There was a characteristic smell in the air, a mixture of tobacco, old paper, and that imported cologne he used only on business trips. I knew the medications were in the top drawer, along with other personal items. While searching among pens, clips, and papers, I felt a strong dizziness. I leaned on the bookshelf to avoid falling and, in this movement, unbalanced some books. The leather-bound Bible, a family heirloom that Anthony displayed with pride, although I had never seen it opened, fell to the floor with a dull thud. The Bible opened in the fall, and from between its yellowed pages slipped a small, folded piece of paper. My first instinct was to put everything back as it was. Anthony would be furious if he knew I was touching his things, but something made me pick up that paper. With trembling hands, I unfolded the note. The handwriting was Edward's, the bank manager, and Anthony's best friend. I recognized it immediately. He sent Christmas cards every year. The message was short and terrifying. If she discovers the truth, kill her. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. The headache seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a strange numbness. My legs weakened, and I had to sit in his armchair to avoid fainting. Who was she? Was it me? What truth was so terrible that it would justify killing me? 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind in those seconds that seemed like an eternity. Carefully, I put the note exactly where it was, between the pages of Proverbs, and returned the Bible to the shelf. I found the painkillers, took one with water from the kitchen, and lay down in the living room, pretending to rest. But my mind was racing. When Anthony returned with the children late in the afternoon, I had already made my decision. I would not confront him directly. If that note meant what I feared, questioning Anthony could be dangerous. Instead, I would pretend nothing had happened while discovering the truth on my own. That night, I served dinner as always. I listened to the children's stories about lunch at their grandmother's house and laughed at the unfunny jokes Anthony told. On the outside, I was the same Gertrude as always. On the inside, something had broken forever. The following days were an exercise in acting. I kept the routine intact. Breakfast prepared early, children ready for school, house clean, dinner on the table at 6 sharp. But I began paying attention to every detail, every word said or unsaid, every gesture. I noticed how Anthony locked the desk drawer when he left, how he quickly hid papers when I entered the room, how he spoke quietly on the phone when he thought I was busy with the children. Small details that previously went unnoticed now screamed at me. A week after the Bible incident, I had my first concrete discovery. I was ironing his shirts, preparing them for the next business trip, when I found a crumpled receipt in the inner pocket of a suit jacket. It was from a jewelry store in Richmond, the neighboring city. The amount was exorbitant, almost 3 times what Anthony gave me monthly for all household expenses. And the purchased item, an engagement ring with a solitaire diamond. I felt as if I had been slapped. Anthony had never given me expensive jewelry. My wedding band was a simple gold piece, and I had some family costume jewelry. Who was that expensive ring for? In the same pocket, I found a small card with an address noted in Richmond. I memorized this information and put everything back exactly as it was. My heart ached, but my determination only grew. I began creating excuses to go to Richmond. I needed special fabrics for my sewing, wanted to visit a sick cousin, had to buy a present for Teresa's birthday. With each visit, I tried to discover more about the mysterious address. It was on my 3rd visit that I succeeded. I found the house, a beautiful construction in an elegant neighborhood very different from our simple house. Discreetly, I asked a lady who was watering the garden next door who lived there. "Oh, it's the young teacher's house, Marianne," the lady replied cheerfully. "Such a beautiful and educated girl. She's expecting a child, poor thing. Her fiancé comes every Thursday. They say he works in another city and can only visit her on that day. It seems they'll get married as soon as he resolves some problems with his ex-wife." Each word was like a stab. First Thursday of the month, exactly the day of Anthony's business trips. The ex-wife would be me. I was already being considered part of the past while living under the same roof as him. I returned home that day with a heavy heart, but with a growing certainty. My marriage was a farce, and I needed to discover more about what Anthony was planning. In the following days, I continued my silent investigation. I befriended Mrs. Irasema, the bank's new secretary, a widow recently arrived in town. Through seemingly casual conversations during our meetings at the market or at church, I collected information about Anthony's work. "We're all so busy with this big transfer happening at the end of the month," she innocently commented after Sunday Mass. "Your husband and Mr. Edward stayed late reviewing documents. I've never seen so much money together in my life. The big transfer Anthony had mentioned. And curiously, he had already warned me that he would make a special trip precisely on that date, a trip that could last longer than usual. The pieces started fitting together, forming a disturbing picture. Anthony and Edward were planning to divert the money from the transfer. The note, the ring, the house in Richmond, the pregnant woman, all were part of a plan. Steal the bank's money and flee to start a new life with Marianne and the child that was about to be born, abandoning me and the children without a penny, possibly without life. That's when I remembered a strange key I had found in his shaving kit months before. At the time, when I asked what it opened, he said curtly that it was from an old file drawer at the bank and quickly put it away. Now, that key gained new meaning. I waited until he left for work and the children for school, and I began searching. It wasn't in the locked desk drawer, nor in the pockets of his suits, nor in the important documents box. Finally, I found it hidden inside a fake book safe on the shelf. Ironically, a book about business ethics. The key opened a small metal box hidden at the bottom of the wardrobe, behind the travel bags. Inside, I found more evidence of the plan. Ship tickets to Argentina, in the names of Anthony Miller and Marianne Oliveira, fake identity documents, and a bundle of love letters signed by Marianne, with references to our future together and the baby, who will soon complete us. The last letter was the most recent, dated just 2 weeks before. My love, only 2 weeks left until we're together forever. I've arranged everything as we agreed. The baby's crib is set up in the bedroom. Can't wait to start our real life away from that suffocating town and that woman who never deserved you. Be careful with the final details of the plan. As Edward always says, if she discovers the truth before time, you know what needs to be done. But I know everything will work out. Soon we'll be the family we always dreamed of being. With all my love, Marianne. Tears ran down my face as I read. 10 years of marriage, 2 children, thousands of dinners served punctually, clothes washed and ironed, nights awake caring for sick children. All this would be discarded like garbage, and worse, if I discovered the plan, I would be eliminated. At that moment, sitting on the bedroom floor, with the evidence of betrayal and crime in my hands, I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. I would not be a victim. I would not be eliminated. I would use everything I discovered to guarantee the future of my children and my own future. Carefully, I put everything back as it was and locked the box, returning it to its hiding place. The key went back to the fake book safe on the shelf. Nothing would reveal that I had discovered the truth. Now I had only 2 weeks until the big heist. 2 weeks to elaborate my own plan. And while preparing dinner that night, smiling at Anthony as if nothing had changed, I already knew what I needed to do. Looking back today, I see how that migraine was actually a blessing in disguise. If I hadn't entered that office, if the Bible hadn't fallen that way, if the note hadn't slipped to the floor, my story would have a very different ending. And you, my dears, have you ever had a moment in life when a small accident revealed a great truth? Leave it in the comments. I love reading your stories. After discovering the whole truth, I spent the night awake. The children slept peacefully, not imagining that our world was about to collapse. Anthony snored beside me, his heavy sleep of someone who carries no guilt. And I, lying with eyes open, saw the moonlight enter through the window, while planning each step of the following days. I had exactly 2 weeks until the date of the big bank transfer they intended to steal. 2 weeks to act before Anthony executed his escape plan with Marianne. 2 weeks to save my life and that of my children. Early the next morning, I began executing my plan. First, I needed my own money. I couldn't depend on the household savings that Anthony rigidly controlled. Luckily, I had been secretly saving the money from my sewing. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for the first steps. Women of my time didn't have bank accounts. I commented to my wealthiest client, Mrs. Eulalia, widow of a rancher, while adjusting the dress for her niece's wedding. Anthony says we don't need that that he takes care of everything." "Nonsense, Gertrude," she exclaimed. "Every woman needs her own money. I'll take you to the bank manager in Richmond tomorrow. Edward and your husband will never know." That's how I opened my first bank account at another bank in another city. I deposited all the money I had saved over the last 5 years. It seemed little to restart a life, but it was a beginning. The second step was to collect evidence. I needed solid proof of the criminal scheme, not just the love letters and the tickets. If something went wrong and Anthony noticed my intentions, I would be the perfect victim. The jealous wife, making up stories for revenge. On mornings when Anthony left earlier for work, I would sneak into his office. Careful to leave everything exactly as I found it, I photographed documents with a small Kodak camera I had bought in Richmond. It was a simple Instamatic that fit in the palm of my hand, easy to hide among my fabrics and sewing threads. Each new document revealed more details of the scheme. Anthony and Edward had been diverting small amounts for at least 3 years, using ghost accounts of elderly or deceased clients. The big transfer would be the final heist, diverting a shipment of $500,000 that would arrive for the expansion of the town's textile factory. But photographing wasn't enough. I needed copies of the original documents. That's when I remembered Mr. Moatsir, owner of the only stationery store in town. His 2 sons studied with Michael, and his wife was my client. I made up a story about wanting to make a surprise album for Anthony's birthday with copies of important documents from our life together. "Mrs. Miller, you know I can't let anyone use the copy machine without authorization," he said, scratching his head. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Moatsir," I replied with my best smile. "It's just that I wanted to make a surprise. I have the children's birth certificates, our marriage certificate, and I wanted to copy them before Anthony came home from work. I mentioned I would make a new dress for his wife as a thank you. And the good man gave in. That afternoon, while the children were at school, I copied the most important documents that proved the scheme. The third step of my plan was the most difficult, finding someone trustworthy to help me. It couldn't be just anyone in town. Edward and Anthony's tentacles reached all important corners. The local sheriff played cards with them on Saturdays. The judge was Michael's godfather. The priest heard Edward's confessions weekly. That's when I remembered Inspector Mendez, a man from the capital who came periodically to inspect the bank. Anthony always complained about him, calling him the self-righteous incorruptible. He was exactly the type of person I needed. I discovered he would be in the region the following week for a routine inspection. Through Mrs. Irasima, the bank secretary, I learned he would be staying at the small-town inn for 3 days. I carefully prepared an envelope with copies of the most important documents, photos, and a letter explaining the whole situation. But how to deliver it without raising suspicions? The inn was across from the central square, where everyone would see me if I entered there. The solution came through Teresa. My daughter had made friends with Marietta, the daughter of the inn's owner, at school. I organized a snack for the girls to play together, offering to drop Teresa off at the inn after school. "What a beautiful purse, Mrs. Zoira," I commented with the proprietress while the girls played in the backyard. "This would coordinate perfectly with the dress I'm making for Father Anselm's birthday. Could you lend it to me so I can measure the strap? I promise to return it today." She lent me the purse, and when I returned it later, the envelope was hidden in the inner lining. Along with it, I placed a note, asking her to deliver it to Inspector Mendez when he arrived, without mentioning my name. The fourth step was to prepare our future. If everything went well, Anthony would go to jail. But what would become of me and the children? A divorced woman with 2 small children in 1969 would face closed doors everywhere. I reconnected with my childhood friend Louise, who lived in the capital and had a small sewing studio. I didn't tell the whole truth, just that my marriage was ending and I would need work soon. "Come here, Gertie. I really need a partner with your talent. There's a small room at the back of the studio where you can stay until you get established," she said without asking many questions. True friends are like that. They extend a hand first and ask questions later. Meanwhile, I continued my normal life. I prepared Anthony's favorite meals, took care of the children, did my sewing. At night, when everyone was asleep, I separated documents, packed a small suitcase with the essentials, and mentally calculated how long it would take to reach the capital if we needed to flee in a hurry. The week flew by. Anthony was increasingly nervous, frequently meeting Edward outside working hours. On the eve of the big transfer, I noticed him watching the children during dinner with a strange, almost melancholic look. Was he feeling remorse for abandoning them? On Wednesday, one day before the money arrived at the bank, I received a discreet sign that my plan was working. Mrs. Iritsema stopped by my house with the excuse of ordering a dress. Inspector Mendez asked for extra documents today of all transfers from the last 6 months, she whispered while I took her measurements. Mr. Edward and your husband are white as paper. My heart raced. The inspector had received my envelope, was investigating, but the danger also increased. If Anthony suspected, he could act before planned. That night, during dinner, I noticed Anthony watching me intently as I served the soup. His gaze alternated between me and the children, as if seeing us for the last time. A chill ran down my spine. "Gertrude," he said suddenly, "I think we'll have to reschedule that Sunday outing with the children. I have to resolve some urgent matters." I swallowed hard. The outing was scheduled for the day after the transfer. Would it be when he planned to disappear? "Of course, dear," I replied naturally, serving more soup. "The children will understand, won't they, Michael?" My son nodded, disappointed. Teresa played with her food, oblivious to the tension hovering over the table. After putting the children to bed, I found Anthony in the office, hunched over papers. The door was ajar, unusual for him. Was it a trap? "Anthony," I called softly. "I need money to buy fabric tomorrow. Mrs. Eulalia wants a new dress for her nephew's wedding." He raised his eyes, and for an instant I saw something I had never noticed before. Fear. "Of course," he said, taking some bills from his wallet. More than I had asked for, much more. "Buy something nice for yourself, too." I thanked him and withdrew, my heart pounding. He had never been generous without reason. Was it a farewell gift or guilt? I returned to the bedroom and sat at the dressing table, brushing my long, dark hair, still without a white strand at 29 years old. In the mirror, I saw a woman who no longer recognized the same features, but the eyes carried new knowledge, an iron determination. That night, while Anthony finally slept, I got up silently and went to the children's room. I adjusted Michael's covers. I brushed the hair from Teresa's face. Silent tears ran down my face. I promised myself that, regardless of what happened the next day, they would have a life of truth, not based on lies. Back in bed, I couldn't sleep. The clock marked the hours slowly, each tick-tock reminding me that time was running out for Anthony, for his plan, and for the life I knew. Dawn broke. The day of the big transfer arrived with a cloudless blue sky. I dressed the children for school. I prepared breakfast, as always. Anthony seemed distracted, constantly checking his watch. "I'll work late today," he announced, avoiding my gaze. "Don't wait for me for dinner." "Any problem at the bank?" I asked innocently, serving more coffee. He hesitated for a second. "No, just bureaucracy. You know how it is." Before leaving, he did something he rarely did. He kissed my cheek and hugged the children, longly. Michael noticed the strangeness, but said nothing. My son was always sensitive to mood changes. After Anthony left, I prepared for any scenario. I separated important documents, certificates, children's vaccination cards, some family photos. I hid money in different places in the house in case I needed to leave in a hurry. I packed 2 small bundles with essential clothes hidden under the bed. The day dragged on. I left the children at school, shopped at the market, sewed a dress for the pharmacist's wife. Normal activities of a common housewife, while inside I was a volcano about to erupt. In the afternoon, Mrs. Iritsema quickly stopped by my house with the pretext of trying on the dress I was making. "There are police from the capital at the bank," she whispered while I adjusted the hem. "They arrived with the money for the transfer. Inspector Mendez is with them. Mr. Edward is locked in the room with 3 men in suits. Your husband tried to leave, but they asked him to stay." I thanked her for the information with a nod, pretending to concentrate on my work. When she left, I sat in the sewing machine chair, trembling. It was happening. My plan was working. But what would come next? I picked up the children from school and took them to my sister-in-law Lucinda's house, Anthony's sister, with the excuse of needing to finish an urgent dress without interruptions. If something went wrong, at least they would be safe. I returned home and waited. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky orange and red. The hours passed and no news. The dinner I prepared was getting cold on the stove. The house, usually noisy with the children's games, was immersed in an oppressive silence. At 8 o'clock, I heard sirens. My heart almost stopped. I ran to the window and saw 3 police cars passing quickly down the street toward the center of town, where the bank was located. Half an hour later, loud knocks on the door startled me. I opened with trembling hands, expecting to find police officers. It was Lucinda, my sister-in-law, pale and breathless. "Gertrude, have you heard? Anthony and Edward were arrested. They're saying they tried to steal the money from the textile factory's transfer. A scandal. The entire town is in the square." I pretended surprise and shock, grabbing the doorframe as if I needed support. "It can't be. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," she replied, entering and closing the door behind her. Inspector Mendez received an anonymous tip with evidence, documents, photos, everything. They had been diverting money for years, and there was more. She hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "But what, Lucinda?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "They found tickets to Argentina in Anthony's name and a woman called Marianne. They say she's pregnant in Richmond." I let myself fall into the chair, covering my face with my hands. I didn't need to pretend shock or pain. They were real, even though I already knew the whole story. One thing was discovering the betrayal in secret. Another was seeing it exposed to the whole town. "The children," I murmured. "Are they sleeping well at your house?" "Yes," replied Lucinda, sitting beside me and holding my hand. "They can stay as long as necessary. Now we need to think about what you're going to do." What was I going to do? The question echoed in my mind, while Lucinda talked about lawyers, police interrogations, and the inevitable scandal that would follow. I already knew the answer, of course. I had planned every detail in the last 2 weeks. But at that moment, with reality finally crashing down on my head, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. My husband was a criminal. He was in jail. He had betrayed not only me, but the trust of an entire community. He had another woman, another child on the way, and according to the note, would have killed me if necessary. The life I knew was over, but somehow I was alive. My children were safe, and for the first time in 10 years of marriage, the future, uncertain and frightening as it seemed, was in my hands. That night marked the end of the Gertrude I had been until then, the obedient wife, the perfect housewife, the invisible woman. The next day, when the sun rose, I would begin to forge a new version of myself. And that's exactly what I did. The news of Anthony and Edward's arrest spread like wildfire. Our small town had never experienced a scandal of that magnitude. The bank closed for 3 days for a complete audit. Police from the capital occupied the local station. Journalists from Richmond and even from Washington arrived to cover the case of the Bible heist, as they called it, because of the note found between the sacred pages. I became overnight the betrayed wife of the criminal. Gazes followed me through the streets, some of pity, others of malicious curiosity, as if looking for signs of complicity or extreme ignorance in me. How did I not notice? How did I not suspect? What did I do wrong for him to betray me? The morning after the arrest, I woke up at Lucinda's house. The children were still sleeping, exhausted by the change in routine. I remember looking out the window and seeing a group of neighbors standing on the sidewalk, gossiping and pointing at the house. The news about Marianne, the pregnancy, and the tickets to Argentina had already leaked, probably through some indiscreet bank employee or police officer. "You don't need to face this now," said Lucinda, bringing me a cup of coffee. "Stay here with the children until things calm down." But I knew that hiding would only feed more gossip. I took a bath, wore one of my best dresses, navy blue with small white details that I had sewn myself, and combed my hair carefully. I applied a little lipstick, something I rarely did on a common day. "I'm going to the market," I announced, taking my purse. "The children need fresh milk when they wake up." Lucinda looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "In the middle of this uproar, I can send my son to get it for you." "I need to show my face, Lucinda. If I hide, they'll say I'm ashamed, that I knew everything, or worse." She didn't understand immediately, but years later, she confessed to me that was the moment she realized I was much stronger than everyone imagined. Walking to the market that morning was like crossing a minefield. With each step, I felt the gazes, heard the whispers that ceased when I approached. At the butcher shop, silence fell when I entered. Ladies with whom I had exchanged recipes for years suddenly didn't know what to say. It was Mrs. Zulmira, the inn's owner, who broke the ice. "Mrs. Miller, good to see you. I was just commenting on how brave you're being through all this. Do you need any help with the children?" I thanked her with a polite smile. I bought what I needed and left with my head held high. Inside, I was trembling like a leaf in the wind, but I would never let them see that. That small victory, facing the market, gave me strength for what would come next. At the sheriff's office, I was informed I needed to go to the Capitol to give a statement. The authorities wanted to confirm I wasn't involved in the scheme. The thought of facing Anthony in an official environment terrified me, but I had no choice. "The children will be fine with Lucinda," Sheriff Valente assured me, a middle-aged man with tired eyes. "You'll be back the same day." 3 days after the arrest, I boarded the 5 a.m. bus to the Capitol. I wore a somber gray outfit that I had spent the previous night adjusting so it would look impeccable. I carried in my purse the children's photos, an embroidered handkerchief my mother had given me, and the little money I had managed to gather. I didn't know what to expect. At the Central Police Station, I was led to a room where 3 men awaited me. Inspector Mendez, whom I knew only by sight, a prosecutor, and a clerk. They offered me coffee, which I accepted more to have something to occupy my trembling hands than out of thirst. "Mrs. Miller," Inspector Mendez began, "we want to make it clear that you are not accused of anything. We're just trying to understand the whole scheme. Your husband and Mr. Edward maintained a sophisticated system of money diversion for at least 3 years. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Were you aware of these activities?" asked the prosecutor, observing me over his glasses. "No, sir," I replied firmly. "I discovered everything 2 weeks ago by chance." I told him about the note in the Bible, the investigations I made, the discoveries about Marianne. I omitted only that it had been me who anonymously sent the evidence to Inspector Mendez. Something told me to keep this detail secret. The statement lasted almost 4 hours. They answered my questions about the legal process. They explained that we would probably lose the house, which was financed by the bank, and that Anthony would face several years in prison. "And what about her?" I asked, unable to pronounce Marianne's name. The inspector exchanged glances with the prosecutor before answering. "Miss Oliveira denies involvement in the criminal scheme, claims she believed her relationship with Mr. Miller was legitimate, that he was getting divorced. She is 7 months pregnant and will not be indicted unless evidence of her participation emerges." I felt a tightness in my heart, not of jealousy, but of a strange solidarity. Perhaps she too had been deceived in her own way. Before leaving, Inspector Mendez called me privately. "Mrs. Miller, we received an anonymous tip 2 weeks ago. Documents, photos, concrete evidence of the scheme. It was you, wasn't it?" I held his gaze without confirming or denying. "Whoever it was," he continued, saved not only the transfer money, but also prevented innocent people from being harmed, including perhaps yourself. He handed me a card with his contact in the capital. If you need anything, don't hesitate to contact me. You demonstrated extraordinary courage. I returned home that night with the certainty that a phase of my life had definitely ended. On the bus, watching the landscape gradually darken, I made a promise to myself. The children would never suffer for their father's choices. I would give them a dignified life, full of love and honesty. The following days were a whirlwind. I received an official notification to vacate the house in 30 days. The bank would reclaim it as part of the compensation for the losses. I had to explain to the children in the most delicate way possible that their father had done something wrong and would be absent for a long time. "Doesn't he love us anymore?" asked Teresa with her big eyes full of tears. "What happened has nothing to do with love for you," I replied, hugging her. "Sometimes adults make serious mistakes and need to face the consequences, but Mommy is here and always will be." Michael, older and sensitive, asked if he could visit his father. I promised that when it was possible and safe, I would take him. This promise cost me more than he will ever know. Meanwhile, the small town buzzed with the scandal. Some friends distanced themselves, fearing association with the thief's family. Others approached, offering practical help: clothes for the children, invitations for lunch, small sewing jobs. I discovered who my true friends were in those dark days. Louise, my friend from the capital, confirmed we could stay in the small room behind her studio. I began planning our move, selling the few pieces of furniture that belonged to me, packing memories, deciding what to take to our new life. A week after the arrest, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Marianne. With delicate handwriting on perfumed paper, she asked forgiveness for the suffering caused, swearing she didn't know about the criminal plan, nor that I and the children would be abandoned without resources. "He told me your marriage had ended years ago, that you only remained together for appearances," she wrote. "I believed because I wanted to believe. Now I carry a child who will be born with his father in prison and an uncertain future ahead. I don't ask for your friendship, just that you know I was also deceived." I folded the letter carefully and put it away. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. But those words planted a seed that would only bloom years later. On moving day, I dressed the children in their best clothes, put our few bags in the taxi, and took one last look at the house where I had lived for 10 years. I didn't feel sadness, just a vague relief. Those walls held more lies than truths. At the bus station, we found familiar faces who came to say goodbye. Lucinda hugged her nephews long, promising to visit them during vacation. Mrs. Eulalia handed me an envelope discreetly. "A small loan," she whispered. "To start your business. I know you'll pay me when you can." The trip to the capital lasted 4 hours, but it seemed we were crossing to another planet. Michael looked fascinated out the window, the buildings getting taller as we approached. Teresa slept in my lap, exhausted by the adventure. As for me, I observed my reflection in the window glass. A 29-year-old woman, officially separated, without her own home, with 2 children to raise, and an uncertain future ahead. Strangely, I didn't feel afraid. For the first time in many years, I breathed freely. Louise was waiting for us at the bus station. Her wide and sincere smile was like a ray of sunshine amid the fog. She hugged me long and then bent down to greet the children. "Welcome to your new life," she said simply. The small room behind the studio was smaller than I imagined. A double bed where the 3 of us would sleep, a small table with 2 chairs, a small wardrobe. The bathroom was shared with the studio, but it was clean. It had windows that let in natural light, and Louise had placed fresh flowers in a colorful vase. "It's temporary," she assured, helping us organize our things. "Soon you'll have your own space." That first night, after the children finally fell asleep, exhausted from the trip and the novelties, I sat on the small back porch. The capital's sky was different. Fewer visible stars, more artificial lights, the constant noise of cars in the distance. Everything was strange. And yet I felt an inexplicable peace. There, under the unknown sky, I swore I would transform our tragedy into triumph. I would not just be the ex-wife of the thief, the poor woman abandoned with 2 children. I would be Gertrude, seamstress, mother, independent woman, someone who found a threatening note and instead of becoming a victim, used it as a catalyst for her liberation. The first months were extremely hard. I worked at Louise's studio during the day, doing adjustments and simple sewing. At night, when the children slept, I created my own models, dreaming of the day I would have my own clientele. Michael and Teresa were enrolled in the local public school, quite a change for children who came from a small school in a small town. Money was counted penny by penny. Many nights after the children went to bed, I cried silently, exhausted from work, worried about the future, hurt by memories. But when the sun rose, I washed my face, applied a little lipstick, and faced another day. Anthony was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Edward received a longer sentence for being the mastermind of the scheme. When the sentence appeared in the newspapers, I showed my children, not to feed anger or hurt, but so they would understand that actions have consequences, that choices define destinies. "Can we visit him?" Michael asked again. "Whenever you want," I replied. "He made serious mistakes, but he continues to be your father." The first visit to the penitentiary was a trial. Seeing Anthony in uniform, thin and worn, made Teresa cry throughout the entire encounter. Michael remained silent, observing his father as if trying to reconcile this image with his memories. "Are you all right?" Anthony asked, avoiding my gaze. "We're starting over," I replied simply. "The children miss you." He tried to explain, to say he never intended to hurt us, that the plan got out of control. I didn't respond. Some lies don't even deserve the effort of being denied. Gradually, our life took shape in the capital. Louise taught me new sewing techniques, introduced me to potential clients, shared her knowledge about the fashion business. After 6 months, I had my own clients, women who appreciated my meticulous work and elegant yet practical designs. With the money I saved and Mrs. Eulalia's loan, we managed to rent a small apartment near the children's school. 2 bedrooms, a tiny living room, a kitchen where the 3 of us barely fit to have dinner, but it was ours. We bought secondhand furniture, I sewed colorful curtains, and Michael painted the walls of his room, shared with Teresa. We transformed that rented space into a home. At night, when I finally had a moment just for myself, I thought about the woman I was and the woman I was becoming. The discovery of that sinister note in the Bible changed everything, not just my destiny, but who I was inside. The submissive and insecure wife had been left behind, along with the house in Virginia and the lies that sustained it. Sometimes I wondered about Mary Ann and the child. Had they stayed in town facing the stigma? Had they returned to her family? Would that baby, half-sibling to my children, ever know about Michael and Teresa? Life continued its course with small daily victories. Teresa learned to read and devoured all the books we could borrow from the library. Michael excelled in mathematics, dreaming of becoming an engineer. I expanded my clientele. My reputation as a seamstress grew, and some party dresses I created were praised in social columns of small newspapers. It was 1971. I was 31 years old, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt in control of my own destiny. It wasn't rich, it wasn't easy, but it was authentic. It was mine. And it was then that destiny decided to bring another twist to our story. It was a Wednesday in October 1971 when the past knocked on my door. Literally. I had just turned 31 and finally began to reap the fruits of my hard work. My small atelier, installed in the living room of our apartment, gained recognition among middle-class ladies of the capital. It wasn't luxurious like the big fashion salons, but I had loyal clients who appreciated my meticulous work and fair prices. That rainy afternoon, I was finalizing a graduation dress for the daughter of an important client when someone knocked at the door. Michael, then 10 years old, ran to answer before I could clean my hands full of pins. "Mom," he called with a hesitant voice that immediately alerted me. "There's a lady here with a baby." I put the pins in the case, quickly adjusted my hair, and went to the door. There, soaked by the rain and visibly nervous, was Marianne. In her arms, a baby of approximately 1 year slept peacefully, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding. Time seemed to have frozen. I studied her face, thinner than in the photos I had seen. Deep dark circles, hair without the shine that had so enchanted Anthony. Her eyes, however, maintained the same determination I recognized in her letter. "Sorry to appear like this," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. I didn't know where to go. For an instant, all the feelings I had repressed threatened to overflow. Anger, hurt, indignation. How dare she appear at my door, bringing the fruit of the betrayal that destroyed my family? But then I looked at the sleeping baby, with chubby cheeks and long eyelashes like Michael's when he was a newborn. An innocent child who didn't ask to be born into that mess. "Come in," I said simply, opening the door wider. "You're soaked." Michael watched the scene open-mouthed, trying to understand who those visitors were. Teresa, who was playing in the bedroom, appeared curious upon hearing unfamiliar voices. "Children, this is an acquaintance who needs help," I explained, avoiding labels or complex explanations at that moment. "Michael, get a clean towel from the closet. Teresa, put water on to heat. We're going to make tea." While the children fulfilled their tasks, I indicated the sofa for Marianne. She sat on the edge, as if fearing to occupy too much space, still holding the baby firmly against her chest. "Is it a boy?" I asked, trying to break the ice while Michael returned with the towel. "Yes," she replied, gently drying her son's face. "Charles, he's 10 months old." I offered tea and cookies, which she accepted with trembling hands. The children, sensing tension in the air, made up an excuse to go play in the bedroom. When we finally were alone, Marianne began to speak, the words coming out like a dam that breaks after containing water for too long. "I lost everything, Mrs. Miller. The house in Richmond was rented in Anthony's name. I was evicted soon after the scandal. I returned to my parents' house in Norfolk. But when Charles was born, my father couldn't bear the shame of having a bastard grandson, as he said. He expelled us. I tried employment at several schools, but doors closed when they discovered my story." She paused, sipping the tea to gain courage. "Anthony said he would come get us when he got out of prison. He promised we would be together, that he would make up for everything. I believed him, as always, but last week I received this." From her wet purse, she took a crumpled envelope. Inside a short and cold letter, written in the handwriting I knew so well. "Marianne, circumstances have changed. When I get out of here, I'll need to start from scratch. I won't be able to support you and the boy as I promised. It's better we go separate ways. Take care, Anthony." I returned the letter without comments. I wasn't surprised. It was the same pattern. Use people and discard them when they no longer served his purposes. "I have nowhere to go," she continued, tears finally escaping. "I'm sleeping in cheap inns. The money is running out. I heard you opened a studio, that you're rebuilding your life. I didn't come asking for charity, I came asking for work. I can clean, attend to clients, anything. I just need a start to take care of my son." I looked at that woman, so young, so desperate, and at the sleeping baby in her arms. He had the same chin as Michael, the same eyebrow shape. He was half-brother to my children, whether I wanted it or not. What right did I have to judge Marianne? She too had been deceived. She too had been discarded when she ceased to be convenient. The difference between us was that I had discovered the truth in time to prepare, to build an escape plan. She was caught unprepared, with a baby in her arms and empty promises in her ears. "Do you have experience with sewing?" I finally asked. She shook her head. "No, but I learned quickly. I was a primary school teacher. I know how to deal with details. I'm organized." I took a deep breath, knowing that the decision I would make at that moment would change the course of several lives, not just mine. "I have a small room in the back," I said, pointing to a small extension of the apartment we used as storage. "It's not much, but there's space for a mattress and a crib. As for work, I need someone to attend to clients and take care of the accounting books while I sew. The salary won't be much at the beginning, but it includes the room and meals." Her eyes widened, alternating between disbelief and relief. "You would accept me after everything?" "I'm not doing this for you," I replied honestly. "I'm doing it for your son, who is brother to my children, and maybe a little for myself too. I've carried anger and hurt for too long. It's time to let it go." That night, after Marianne and Charles were installed in the improvised room, I sat with Michael and Teresa to explain the situation in the most delicate way possible. "The baby who came today is your brother," I said simply. "Your father's son with another person. He and his mother need help, and we're going to help them for a while." Michael, always sensitive and intuitive, frowned. "Is she the woman for whom Dad left us?" I was impressed with his perception. "Yes, but she was also deceived like us, and the baby is not to blame for anything." Teresa, with the simplicity of her 8 years, shrugged. "Can I play with him when he grows up?" "Of course, dear. He's your brother." The adaptation wasn't easy. In the first days, Marianne could barely look me in the eye, ashamed and grateful at the same time. The children oscillated between curiosity and confusion. Neighbors gossiped when they saw us together at the market or taking the children to school. The betrayed wife and the mistress under the same roof was material for scandal in any era, especially in the conservative 1970s. But gradually a routine was established. Marianne had a natural talent for organization. In a few days, she reorganized the studio, created a scheduling system for clients, and took over all the administrative part I so neglected. With her taking care of these aspects, I could focus exclusively on the creations, increasing our productivity. The children adapted more quickly than I imagined. Teresa adopted the role of older sister with enthusiasm, enchanted with the baby who smiled at her. Michael, although more reserved, frequently helped Marianne with small tasks, especially when he perceived she was overwhelmed. At night, after the children slept, sometimes we would talk in the small kitchen, two women united by the same man who betrayed them, trying to understand how to move forward. "How did you discover?" she asked one night while mending a pair of Charles's overalls. "About us, about the plan." I told her about the note in the Bible, the investigations, the evidence I gathered. She listened in silence, hands paralyzed over the fabric. "You sent the evidence to the inspector," she concluded, "not as an accusation, but as recognition. That's why he was arrested before fleeing." "I did what I needed to protect my children and myself." She nodded slowly. "I would have done the same if I had known." On another night, when Charles had a fever and we took turns monitoring him, she confessed to me how she met Anthony. "It was my first year as a teacher. He came to the school for a lecture on financial education for children. He was so charming, so attentive. He said he was separated, that he only kept up appearances in the small town because of his position at the bank. I believed every word." It wasn't hard to understand how she had been deceived. I myself, who lived 10 years with him, never suspected his duplicity until I found that note. The months passed, and something unexpected happened. We began to function as an unconventional family. We shared responsibilities, meals, small joys, and daily concerns. Marianne revealed herself to be an excellent storyteller, enchanting the 3 children before bed. I taught her the secrets of sewing, surprised by her ability to learn complex techniques. The studio prospered. With Marianne organizing the administrative part, I could accept more orders, including wedding dresses that paid better. At the end of 1972, we moved to a larger space, an apartment with 3 bedrooms in the same neighborhood, with a spacious living room that we transformed into a more professional studio. It was at this time that I received an unexpected visit. I was alone in the studio, finalizing a dress, when the intercom rang. "Mrs. Miller," said the doorman, "there's a gentleman called Edward wanting to speak with you." Edward? The name caused a chill. The former bank manager, Anthony's partner in the fraudulent scheme, the author of the note that had changed my life. Send him up, I decided after a moment of hesitation. The man who entered my studio was unrecognizable. The Edward I knew was elegant, always in a well-cut suit and impeccable hair. This man was thin, pale, with prematurely gray hair and deep, dark circles. "Thank you for receiving me," he said, refusing the coffee I offered. "I was released 3 days ago, reduced sentence for good behavior." I remained silent, waiting for him to explain the reason for the visit. "I came to ask forgiveness," he continued, looking at his own hands. "I know I don't deserve it, that you probably hate me. The note was Anthony's idea. He feared you would discover about Marianne, about the money. He said it was just a precaution, that it would never be used." I believed, or wanted to believe. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Because I spent 3 years in prison thinking about the man I became, about what we almost did to you, the children. Anthony feels no remorse, you know? He blames everyone except himself. But I can't live with this weight anymore." I studied his face for signs of manipulation, but I saw only exhaustion and genuine shame. "What do you intend to do now?" I asked. "Return to my hometown in the South. My brother has a small business there. He promised to give me a chance. I know I can never fully compensate for the harm I caused, but I want to try to live honestly from now on." When he got up to leave, he said something that surprised me. "Your denunciation saved many lives, did you know? Not just your own. If we had managed to flee with that money, many families would have lost their savings. Jobs would have been destroyed when the factory couldn't expand. Your courage made more difference than you imagine." After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching the busy street below. Edward's visit brought up memories I tried to keep buried, but also brought a strange sense of closure. The man who had written those threatening words was repentant, seeking redemption. That didn't erase the past, but somehow made the present lighter. When Marianne returned with the children from school, I didn't mention the visit. Some bridges with the past are better left behind. 1973 brought new challenges and opportunities. Michael, now 12 years old, stood out more and more at school, especially in sciences and mathematics. Teresa, at 10, revealed talent for drawing. Her illustrations began to inspire some of my models. Charles, almost 3 years old, was a happy and curious child who called me Aunt Gertie and Marianne simply Mommy, without yet understanding the complexity of our situation. It was in this year that we made a decision that would definitely change the course of our lives. An influential client, owner of a fine fabric store, offered me a partnership in a new venture, a boutique in the city center focused on custom-made clothes for special occasions. "You have the talent, I have the capital and contacts," she explained. "We can transform your home studio into a real business with a storefront and everything else." The opportunity was tempting, but frightening. It would mean a larger investment, more responsibilities, more visibility. "I need to talk to my partner," I replied, using the term we had adopted to describe Marianne to strangers, avoiding complicated explanations. That night, after the children were asleep, I put the proposal on the table in our small kitchen. "It's risky," pondered Marianne, always cautious with finances since our experience with men who manipulated money. "But it's also the chance we've been waiting for. If it works out, we can give the children a better education, maybe even buy a house someday." We discussed until late, weighing pros and cons, making calculations on pieces of paper, dreaming a little too. In the end, we decided to accept. The home studio had sustained us in difficult times, but it was time to grow. "Confections by Gertrude," I suggested as a name. "How about something more modern?" Marianne countered. "Atelier Nouveau, or something like that?" We laughed together, realizing how we had become a real team over the years. Two women broken by the same storm, who learned to rebuild together what they had lost separately. The next day, when I informed my client that we accepted the proposal, she smiled with satisfaction. "I knew you would say yes. I've already reserved the space. that store on Madison Avenue that closed last month. It will need renovation, of course, but it has potential. In 3 frantic months, we transformed the empty space into an elegant boutique. Marianne revealed talent for decoration, creating a sophisticated environment with limited resources. We hired 2 seamstresses to help with basic orders, while I dedicated myself to exclusive pieces, which would be our trademark. The inauguration was a small local event with cheap champagne in borrowed glasses and appetizers prepared in our own kitchen. Michael, serious in his best clothes, received guests at the door. Teresa distributed small scented sachets we had made as souvenirs. Charles, still too young to understand the importance of the moment, enchanted the clients with his easy smile. Looking around at the beautiful space we had created, at the healthy and happy children, at Marianne organizing everything efficiently, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense that I needed to lean on the counter. 4 years before, I had found a threatening note hidden in my husband's Bible. At that moment, I thought my life was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was just beginning. The note that should have sealed my death sentence became, ironically, my safe conduct to freedom. The woman who should have been my rival became my closest ally. The tragedy that should have destroyed me ended up rebuilding me stronger, wiser, and surprisingly, happier. Our boutique, Atelier Gertrude, yes, I ended up partially giving in to Marianne's modern suggestion, flourished beyond our most optimistic expectations. From 1973 to 1975, we went from a small space on Madison Avenue to an elegant store, with a wide storefront on Park Avenue, a noble area of the capital. What began as a custom sewing studio transformed into a reference of fashion for special occasions. I remember the pride I felt when in 1975 one of my wedding dresses was photographed for a women's magazine. I, Gertrude, the woman who 5 years before faced the scandal of being the thief's wife, now saw my creation stamped on glossy pages with the caption, "Elegance, signed by Gertrude." Marianne revealed herself to be not only an excellent administrator, but also a visionary for business. It was her idea to expand to a small line of ready-to-wear dresses, more accessible than custom-made, but maintaining the quality that characterized us. We created the Young Gertrude line, inspired by Teresa's drawings, already a teenager with evident artistic talent. Our unusual partnership, the betrayed wife and the ex-mistress, became a discreet subject in the city's social circles. Some people turned up their noses, finding the arrangement scandalous. Others admired our ability to overcome the past for the sake of the children and the future. Most, fortunately, were too busy with their own dramas to care about ours. The children grew up healthy, each with their distinct personality. Michael, at 14 years old, was a serious and studious teenager, fascinated by engineering and sciences. Teresa, at 12, already showed the artistic temperament that would mark her life, always with a sketchbook under her arm. And Charles, at 5 years old, was a happy and sociable child, adored by everyone at the studio. Our unconventional family now lived in a spacious house in the Georgetown neighborhood, with a garden where the children could play, and a studio in the back where I created my models when I needed silence. We had 2 maids who helped us with the house and children, a luxury unthinkable a few years before. Life finally seemed stabilized, like a boat that finds calm waters after a violent storm. Until one afternoon in June 1976, the past came to visit us again. I was at the studio adjusting a graduation dress for a client when our receptionist entered hesitantly. "Mrs. Miller, there's a man wanting to speak with you. He says he's Mr. Anthony Miller." The pin I was holding slipped between my fingers, slightly pricking my skin. Anthony. After 7 years in prison, he was free, a fact I knew would eventually happen, but for which I never felt completely prepared. "Tell him I'm busy," I replied automatically, a reflex of self-preservation. But then, looking at my client in the mirror, a young 18-year-old about to graduate, her whole life ahead of her, I thought about the woman I had become. I was no longer that insecure wife, intimidated by the mere presence of my husband. I was a businesswoman, a mother, a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes. No. Ask him to wait in the reception room. I'll finish in 15 minutes. I completed the adjustment with hands that refused to tremble. I scheduled the final fitting of the dress and took a deep breath before walking to reception. Anthony was sitting rigidly in one of the elegant armchairs, looking out of place in that feminine and sophisticated environment. The years in prison had aged his face, completely whitened his once black hair. He wore a simple suit, clean but out of fashion, probably bought before his imprisonment. Our gazes met, and for an instant I was transported back to that kitchen in 1969, preparing breakfast for a man who planned to abandon me. Or worse. "Gertrude," he said, standing up. "Anthony," I replied with a calmness that surprised myself. "Let's talk in my office." I guided him through the studio, aware of the curious glances from the seamstresses and assistants. Many of them knew my story, or at least parts of it. Seeing the infamous ex-husband was like witnessing a legend character come to life. My office was a space that reflected who I had become. Organized, elegant, without ostentation, with Teresa's drawings framed on the walls, and a large table where I could both design models and review contracts. "You've built something impressive here," he commented, observing the environment. "What do you want, Anthony?" I asked directly, indicating he should sit while I took my place behind the desk. The power dynamic between us was clearly different now. "To see my children," he replied, looking at a photo frame on my desk that showed Michael and Teresa at their middle school graduation. "I was released a week ago. I'm living in a boarding house near here. Michael is 15 years old now. Teresa, 13. They're no longer the children you left behind." "I know," he said, rubbing his hands nervously. "I received the letters and photos you sent. Thank you for that, for maintaining that connection, even after everything." I nodded silently. Despite everything, I had always kept my promise to keep the children connected to their father. I sent photos, school reports, important news, allowed them to visit him when they showed interest, although these visits had become increasingly rare over the years. "I also want to see Charles," he added, surprising me. "Charles? You rejected your own son. Marianne showed me your letter." A blush of shame hit his aged face. "I was desperate, Gertrude. I thought it would be easier for everyone if I simply disappeared from your lives. But in prison, I had too much time to think, to regret." I studied his face, looking for signs of the old Anthony, the manipulator, the charming liar who had deceived not just me, but an entire town. I found only a worn, middle-aged man carrying the weight of his choices. "I can't decide for Marianne about Charles," I finally replied. "As for Michael and Teresa, they're almost adults now. The choice to see you or not should be theirs." "That's fair," he agreed. "Are you with someone now?" The question caught me off guard with its irrelevance. What did my personal life matter to him? "My private life is none of your business, Anthony. It hasn't been since the day I found that note." He lowered his head, accepting the reprimand. "I understand. I just wanted to know if you managed to be happy despite what I did." "I'm happy despite you, not because of you," I replied, realizing the profound truth in those words. "I built a life I love, with people I value. The note that should have destroyed me ended up freeing me." When he left, I promised to inform the children about his return and let them decide if they wanted to meet him. I watched from the window as he walked down the sidewalk, shoulders slumped, a man diminished by his own choices. That night, I gathered Michael, Teresa, and Marianne in the living room. Charles was already asleep, oblivious to the emotional storm forming. "Your father has been released," I announced without beating around the bush. "He came to the studio today, wants to see you." Michael, almost a man now, crossed his arms defensively. In recent years, his visits to his father had practically ceased, replaced by an almost obsessive dedication to his studies. "I have nothing to say to him," he declared, with the firmness of young people who believe they have all the answers. Teresa, always more emotional, bit her lip, her eyes welling up. "Did he ask about me specifically?" "He asked about both of you," I replied softly. "The decision is yours. I won't force you to do anything." Marianne remained silent, but I noticed how her hands clenched nervously. The mere mention of Anthony still affected her, despite the years and the new life she had built. "He wants to see Charles too," I added, looking directly at her. Her eyes widened. "After the letter he sent me? After abandoning us? Why now?" "He says he repented, that he had time to think in prison." A heavy silence fell over the room, each absorbed in their own thoughts and memories. "I'll meet him," Teresa finally decided. "Not for him, but for me. I need to understand some things." Michael shook his head. "I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be." Marianne took a deep breath, eyes fixed on a photograph of Charles on the wall. "If he really wants to know his son, I can't deny that to Charles, but it will be on my terms, with clear boundaries." In the days that followed, our home, normally a refuge of hard-won peace, became an emotional minefield. Teresa met her father at a cafe near home, a 2-hour conversation that left her exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if she had finally released questions kept for years. "He cried when I showed him my drawings," she told me afterward. "He said he always knew I would be an artist. It's strange, Mom, but I don't feel angry anymore. Just a kind of sadness for what could have been." Michael maintained his decision not to see his father, channeling any emotional conflict into his studies and science projects. At 15 years old, he already spoke with conviction about studying engineering at the best university in the country. The most tense meeting was between Marianne, Charles, and Anthony, held in a public park at her insistence. I didn't participate, of course, but Marianne told me afterward. While we had tea on the porch, she described how Charles, not knowing who that gentleman was, animatedly showed him his favorite toy car. "Anthony kept repeating how he looks like Michael at the same age," she reported, her voice trembling. "He asked forgiveness, said he wrote that letter in a moment of desperation. Offered money for Charles's education." "Did you accept?" I asked, knowing her fierce independence. "No," she replied firmly. "I said we didn't need his charity, that you and I built something solid, that Charles has everything he needs, but I agreed he can see the boy occasionally if Charles shows interest." In the following weeks, Anthony became a peripheral presence in our lives. He would appear on Sundays to take Teresa to lunch or Charles to the zoo. Michael remained steadfast in his refusal, although I suspected he secretly followed the stories Teresa told about these meetings. As for me, I maintained a polite distance. There was no more anger or fear, just the clarity that our paths had definitely separated 7 years before when I found that note in the Bible. Life continued its course. Our boutique continued to prosper, expanding to a second store in a newly inaugurated shopping mall, a new concept at the time. In 1978, I was invited to present a small collection in the first version of what would become the New York Fashion Week decades later. Michael graduated with honors from high school and was accepted to MIT, realizing his dream of studying engineering. Teresa, following her artistic talent, entered the Rhode Island School of Design, eventually specializing in fashion design to work by my side. Charles, growing up in an environment surrounded by creativity and entrepreneurship, showed talents for business even as a child. Anthony found work as an accountant in a small company, living modestly in a rented apartment. The luxurious life he had known before prison was definitely in the past. At important events for the children, graduations, presentations, competitions, we maintained a cordial distance, silently recognizing that, despite everything, we were united by the 3 young people we helped raise. It was in 1980, almost 11 years after the discovery of the fateful note, that the cycle finally completed. I was in my studio working on the final details of a wedding dress when my assistant interrupted me. "Mrs. Miller, there's a couple here wanting to speak specifically with you about an exclusive wedding dress." I adjusted my hair, now with some gray strands that I wore with pride, and went to the reception room. There, holding hands, were Edward, the former bank manager, author of the note, and a woman approximately his age with a shy smile. "Edward," I greeted him, surprised. I hadn't seen him since his visit years ago, shortly after leaving prison. "Mrs. Miller," he replied, visibly nervous. "This is Helena, my fiancée. We're getting married next month. A simple ceremony. When we were looking for someone to make her dress, your name appeared in all the recommendations. I didn't know if I would be welcome, but—" Helena squeezed his hand encouragingly. "He told me about his past, about his connection with Mrs. Miller," she explained. "I know it's asking a lot, but I would be honored if you would consider creating my dress." I looked at that man who once had written the words, "If she discovers the truth, kill her," and his fiancée, who accepted him despite his dark past. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. The man who had participated in a plan that almost destroyed my life now came to me seeking help to celebrate his love. 11 years ago, I would have refused immediately, moved by hurt and justified resentments. But the woman I was now understood something about second chances, about new beginnings, about transforming tragedies into triumphs. "Come with me, Helena," I said, guiding her to the fitting studio. "Let's talk about what you imagine for your big day." In the months and years that followed, our story continued to unfold in directions I could never have predicted that fateful afternoon in 1969. Michael graduated as an engineer and eventually opened his own construction company. Teresa became my creative partner at the studio, bringing fresh air to my traditional creations. Charles, with support from both Marianne and Anthony, went into business administration, eventually taking over the management of the business that Marianne and I built. Marianne and I never separated, neither as partners nor as family. That temporary situation transformed into a lifelong partnership based on mutual respect, deep understanding, and a shared love for the 3 children we raised together. Many didn't understand our dynamic, but we learned to ignore external judgments a long time ago. Anthony passed away in 1995 after a sudden heart attack. At the funeral, we were all there: Michael, Teresa, Charles, me, Marianne. Not for lost romantic love, but out of respect for the man who, despite his enormous mistakes, had connected us in ways none of us could have imagined. Today, at 78 years old, I look back and see how a simple note hidden in a Bible completely altered the course of my existence. What should have been my death sentence became, ironically, the catalyst for a full and authentic life. I now have 6 wonderful grandchildren. The boutique transformed into a nationally respected brand, although I officially retired a few years ago, leaving the business in the capable hands of Teresa and Charles. Marianne and I still live together, 2 elderly ladies who shared so much that they became practically sisters. Sometimes, when we're gathered for a Sunday lunch, my children, grandchildren, Marianne, I think about that frightened 29-year-old woman, trembling as she read a threatening note with no idea how she would face the future. I wish I could go back in time and whisper in her ear, "Courage, Gertrude. What seems like the end of everything is just the beginning of something extraordinary. The storm is brutal, but what you'll build after it will be stronger and more beautiful than you ever imagined." That's what I'd like to leave with you today, my dears. Whatever storm you're facing, know that it can be the beginning of something new, not the end of everything. Sometimes, we need something to break completely so we can build something much more beautiful in its place. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey of memories. If this story touched your heart, leave your like, share it with someone who needs to hear a message of hope, and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel for more stories of overcoming. Tell me in the comments if a great difficulty ever transformed into a blessing in your life, a loving hug from this grandma who learned that it's not the events that define our lives, but how we choose to respond to them. Until the next video,